Alright, so I play a lot of video games, always have. Ever since the mid-90s I've played video games pretty much daily. It's just one of my preferred ways to spend my spare time. And for as long as I can remember, video games have always been expensive. And especially when I didn't pay for them, I only ever had a handful of them. I never had a massive collection for any one system growing up. But many of the games I had and I loved I would play to death. Just over and over again because, yeah, they were expensive. And I knew I couldn't just get a new one when I finished the last one. However, a lot has changed since then. I'm now an adult, I pay for my own games. And the video game industry has grown massively since the 90s. And the 2000s as well. It's gone from being a niche hobby only kids and neckbeards participated in, to a multi-billion-dollar industry, and a behemoth that has actually surpassed Hollywood in profitability. Everyone basically plays video games now. So the market has grown drastically, as have the profits. But the prices of video games have pretty much stayed the same, even as inflation has increased prices of pretty much everything else. Video games have always been around $60. Until recently, when some companies have decided that $60 is not enough. Let's try 70 instead. Or how about 80? Or 90? How about $100 for a single video game? We're not quite there yet for standard editions, but they're trying to test the waters and see how far they can push it. And some people are getting vocal about it, but most people seem to be prepared to just pay it, at least if the game is good. Now, I'm aware of the fact that I'm not your standard consumer. If everyone's buying habits were the same as mine, most companies would be bankrupt, because I just don't spend money like most people do. And while I do play a lot of video games, and have a pretty extensive collection, both digitally on Steam and physically on my shelf, I don't really buy new games on release. In fact, the last time I bought a brand new game on release was most likely November of 2014, when Warlords of Draenor launched, an expansion for World of Warcraft. And I got together with a friend of mine and we played it on launch. I'm pretty sure it cost €50 back then. I checked. And since then I have only ever bought games either heavily discounted on Steam, digitally, or cheap second-hand physical copies. I did pay around €40 for Sekiro, because it rarely went on sale and was never heavily discounted. I also paid around €30 for Elden Ring, but those are actually outliers, and the most expensive games I bought in the last 10 years. In fact, most games I bought have been €10 or less. Many of the games have been less than €5 a piece. But that's really the sweet spot for me, €10 or less. And guess what, it's not like these are some terrible B-tier games either. These are pretty much all great high quality games. I mean, basically my entire physical game collection is just big AAA titles. I just wait a few years until they're cheap, and then I buy them, because they all become cheap eventually. Except in a very few rare cases, where they only become reasonably priced. Like $30 for a FromSoft title is very reasonable, and actually worth the money. But would I pay $80 to play Dark Souls? No. Because I have plenty of other things to play, there's simply no need. And that's the crux of the matter right there. There are just so many options now, that I don't feel any need to play the latest big thing, immediately. I really don't feel like I'm missing out, because I have other great games to play, and eventually I will get around to the latest big thing. Except now it doesn't cost $80, but less than 20 for the same exact game. And in most cases, a better experience because it's actually patched now. All the bugs are fixed. I mean, I just finished my 50-hour run of Kingdoms of Amalur, and that game came out in 2012. And I paid something like €5 for it. Why do I need to pay 70 buckaroos for Dragon Age The Veilguard, when I can just play something else right now? There's no reason, which is why I don't pay those kinds of prices and don't intend to start anytime soon either. And that is the reason a lot of people are starting to come around to being a patient gamer. So that's sort of my own thinking around why I personally don't support these games at these price points. But the second thing I really wanted to talk about is that these big AAA game developers are trying to shift the blame for these recent price hikes to inflation and rising development costs. The latter being the big boogeyman here. Rising development costs are just constantly being brought up as the number one reason for raising prices. And it is true that development costs have been ballooning in recent years. Video games didn't used to cost more than Hollywood blockbusters to produce, and now they do. AAA games routinely have budgets in the hundreds of millions now, and yeah, that's a problem. However, I have a few issues with this. Number one being the quality of the product. The quality of these games that are being produced just isn't up to the standard where it needs to be. You're spending more money on development, but the quality isn't going up. In fact, it's going down, at least in a lot of cases. So now you're asking for more money for a lesser product. That doesn't make any sense. Now, if the argument was that in order to keep the quality high, you need to increase the prices of the product because development costs have risen, then fine, alright, that makes sense. But in most cases, that's not true. So you can't really even justify the cost increase. And the second issue I have is that you don't need teams of hundreds working on a game. And you don't need to spend hundreds of millions developing it. Indie games and AA studios prove this over and over again. Sure, some games require enormous investment and insane development times and huge teams, but most games don't. So how about instead of increasing the retail price for games, you cut down on your team sizes and make smaller games that are cheaper and faster to make and that you can still turn a profit on, even if they don't sell 10 million copies at $80 a pop. How's that sound? Too reasonable? Yeah, I thought so. But the third issue I have with this claim that development costs are rising and therefore games need to cost more is that if you look at Hollywood, you can clearly see that this is not true. Now, what the hell does Hollywood have to do with any of this? Well, major Hollywood blockbusters cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make, just like all these big AAA video games. But ticket prices to go see a movie are around 16 euros where I live. And you can get a brand new movie on Blu-ray for around 20 euros. So you can go see a movie in the theater, then buy it on Blu-ray on release, and own it forever, and combined it'll cost you less than 40 euros total. And yet these game studios would have you believe that charging $60 for a video game with a similar budget isn't enough, but that they need to charge more? Now you could try to make the argument that these two aren't really comparable, because they are two different mediums with two different consumer bases, and that a movie only provides you with 2 hours of entertainment, while a video game could easily provide you with dozens of hours. So of course it has to cost more. But the reality is that video games are now mainstream. The video game industry is now bigger than the movie business. And how many hours of entertainment the product provides is completely irrelevant when the budgets are comparable. Because if Hollywood can spend hundreds of millions producing a movie, while charging roughly $20 for it, and still be wildly profitable, then how come the video game industry can't stay afloat while charging 3 times as much for their product when they cost the same to make? Make this make sense to me, because the math isn't mathing. If Hollywood can make a profit on these $200 million productions with the prices they charge, surely these AAA game studios can do the same with their far more expensive products especially taking into consideration that the video game industry makes around 3 times as much money per year now. But no, instead they shut down studios left and right and increased game prices by a third. Yes, a jump from $60 to $80 is in fact a 33% increase. And yes, Nintendo just did that. And yes, people are still buying the games. So we have literally no one else to blame but ourselves. Because believe it or not, we as consumers actually have all the power here. All of it. So if you don't like this trend, vote with your wallet. Also drop a like and subscribe and comment below if you feel like it. But yeah, I think that's about it for today and see you next time.